Welcome to Just Me podcast. My name is Sid Madge, and I thought that it would be good to start the year off with, obviously, because it's 2025 today, with me recording some thoughts about last year, but also some hopes and dreams for this year, 2025, and also to answer the questions that I asked many guests on the various podcasts that we've had over the few years that we've been doing them. So, who are you and what do you do? I'm Sid Madge. I founded Me in 2015 after a session that I was asked to do by the Welsh Government in a school in Wrexham. And I took a very simple question to the class, which were year 10, 11 students, pupils, about 20 to 30 of them, and asked them a very simple question, which is what one word would you use to describe yourself? And the first lad that answered said weirdo. I thought he was being beautifully ironic and unique and creative, and I said to him, what a wonderful word. And he said, no, Sid, he said, I'm bullied, I don't fit in at school. So I said, well, hold that thought for the minute. And I went around the rest of the class, asked them their words. At least 40% identified with negative perceptions and words such as abnormal, freak, misfit. And I was horrified. So my eldest daughter, Lily, was their age. So she was 14, 15 at the time. And I said to them, so where does this thinking come from? And I picked up my phone and I said, okay, so this phone is based on an operating system. If that code and that operating system is faulty and glitchy, what would happen to the performance of the phone? Well, we all agreed that it wouldn't work and wouldn't function as we would want it to. And I said, well, is that the same with human beings? And we all agreed that it would be, and it is. So I said, so okay, so if we could then get into our operating system, our code, could we change our thinking? And we all agreed that we could. So I had only about 50 minutes left of the session. So I said, okay, well, let's get into some of that thinking and let's explore where it comes from. Came up with some crazy creative exercises. And literally within 50 minutes, started to change their thinking about how they saw their lives, how they reacted to life, how they looked to the future. And we all agreed at the end of that session that we're all freaks and misfits and weirdos, and what a wonderful world it is. Now, I left that session and I guess that one word, weirdo, changed my life. And I did some research into things like self-harming, all the stuff I suppose 10 years ago. And it's 10 years ago this year that we would have started. So March 2015, which is wonderful. So I started to look at all the stuff that people didn't want to talk about 10 years ago, which was why were kids being excluded from school, things like pupil referral units, people who've been unemployed for generations, decades, self-harm, suicide, and obviously looked at businesses and culture and how they're changing and how they're adapting, and then started doing some pilots, working with the Department of Work and Pensions, working with schools, colleges, universities, to see if I could come up with some, exercises, creative thinking exercises that would change and transform lives. And that was 10 years ago. We've had thousands of people through our programs. We work with Department of Work and Pensions. We work with people like Fortnum and Mason, Morgan Sindall, Vitrify, prisons now, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But yeah, we've worked with some incredible people, some brilliant people like you, and I hope that you've been to one of our sessions, or you've seen me talk, or you've seen us talk, or read the books or whatever, because it's been a wonderful journey. It really has. Has it been hard? Unbelievably hard. So I suppose that's my answer to the questions of how did I get to today. What was my route and upbringing? I mean, I came from a fairly neurotypical family, I guess. Mum and a dad. Didn't like my dad. Didn't really know him. Didn't ever talk to him, really. And I think, I spent, I know I did. I spent 20, 30 years working in the marketing and branding and kind of design industry, of which I loved. I mean, it was great. I was very lucky. I went to college, got a degree in visual communication, basically colouring in. And people used to pay me a lot of money to colour in for them around the world, which was great. Loved it. But then relocated, to North Wales to be near my daughter, Lily. And, as I mentioned, went into a school and that changed my life. I mean, it really did. And I never thought that wasn't on the cards. I wasn't looking for some kind of divine intervention. But that one lad, and I wish that I'd made a note of his name. Paula often says it's a shame he didn't write his name down, and I hope that maybe he's listening, or maybe he's listened, or maybe, he's, I don't know, he's out there doing some amazing things. And that one word, weirdo, I hope he realises that changed my life and the lives of many thousands of people, thereafter. And I think for me, what have I learnt along the way? I think for me last year, 2024, was to really stay strong and to never give up. And, it's hard running a company. It's hard trying to find the funding. It's hard building the resources. But if you have that vision, and one of my favourite people is Steve Jobs, who's sadly no longer with us. And his advertising campaign, Think Different, is still one of my favourites of all time. The whole thing about, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the freaks, all of that. And they're the ones who do change the world. And I'm not saying that, I'm changing the world or we're changing the world in any way, but our intention is to do that, is to transform lives, to help people live healthier, happier lives. And we've got this great saying that, we help people find, live and give their magic, and we do. But until you can find that little essence of who you are and your purpose and why you do what you do and what you want to do in life, can you really find your place in life? And then once you've then found that place, that unique sense of you being you can then live that more every day and experience that in a far more kind of broader, not just surviving, but beginning to thrive, beginning to do stuff. And then the ultimate thing is to give that magic, to share that magic with others. We know from Maslow, it's the kind of, you go from kind of surviving to thriving, which is wonderful. And we've got so many people that have done exactly that. They found that inner essence of magic, and then they've lived that, and they're living that, and then they share that. There's a wonderful lady called Sophie who was on a course back in 2023, and she wasn't in a particularly good place in life, and she came on the course, and I think she's been on 3 or 4 courses now. And what's lovely is that she then started going to park runs, started running and volunteering, and now her world has completely changed. And her sister, beautifully, Sarah, came on the course last year, 2024, and again has found that sense of magic and is living that sense of magic. Is now helping other people find their magic and find the way through this world, which is tough. I mean, it really has. So when I look at the question, what and who has helped me and us, it's you. Every day. I mean, last year we were contacted by H&P Berwyn, which was brilliant, and asked if we would apply for some prosperity funding money, which we did do, and we got some money to come up with a new program called Counting on Confidence, which goes into prisons and helps, both prisoners and prison officers think about numeracy and literacy, but really, in essence, think about that piece about agency, about identity, about self. It's like, know thyself. Socrates said it, years and years ago, thousands of years ago. It's like, how do I understand who I am? How do I put myself into context? And the work we've been doing in prisons, not just with H&P Berwyn, H&P Liverpool and H&P Stokeheath, we've had over 300 prisoners and staff through the programme, and it's done amazing things because people have kind of realised that it's all down to thinking, it's down to the essence of learning. And it's been a beautiful journey, and it will continue next year, and hopefully we'll be going into the Young Offenders Institute in Feltham, which is, notoriously difficult, prison, and I was there just before Christmas and met some truly beautiful people. Some of the staff there, amazing people, just doing amazing things. And I know there's so much negative press about prisons and prisoners and prison leavers and stuff, but it's hard for them. I mean, it really is. I mean, there's only one prisoner out of the thousands of prisoners that I've met over the years who I would say really does need to be in an institution. And I'm not saying that I've been into every prison, because I know that I haven't. I haven't been into the maximum security prisons, but the prisons that I've been to, there is only one prisoner out of thousands that I think should be, kept in prison. The others have all got very sad stories of neglect, being in the care system, being let down, being abused, and then they're locked up, they're incarcerated, and not treated particularly kindly. And I'm not saying there isn't a victim side here, because we know that there is, but they've done wrong, and usually they are a process of their environments, and some of them have come from incredibly neglectful environments, and I've cried many times when I think of some of the people that I've met and the stories that they tell me of the things that they've had to suffer and go through. And as children, if we could then look at their lives and think, well, actually, have we let them down? The answer is yes. So for me, it's those people that help me every day, realise that there's a better way. There really is. We've also sadly said goodbye to 3 people who were very, Mags, who was on the course, I think 4 or 5 years ago, crazy maverick lady, wonderful, but again, searching for that sense of identity. And we stayed in touch, for the 5 years or 6 years or whatever. Sadly, I went to a funeral last year and said goodbye to her and just thanked her for being the person that she was, because those are the people, that's why we do what we do. Also said goodbye to Alan and also to Mick. Mick I knew, 20, 30 years ago. He's a creative, incredible person, just an amazingly creative person. And I think as the years roll by, as the days roll by, the minutes roll out, for me, it's a big reminder of how precious time and life is. I mean, it really, really is. We also welcome so many new people, to the kind of the Me family. And thank you to you, thank you to all those people that joined the fold. So what obstacles have hindered and helped me? It's interesting because years ago I used to be very pessimistic about life. I used to be a bit of a moaner about stuff. I used to be very angry about things. But I think every time that I get challenged, whether it's a funding issue or whether it's a technical issue, whatever that is, or, I think, my 3 younger children now they helped me? They help me every single day. They help me realise what's important in life, and the way that they play and they see stuff. I just see kind of, I need to tidy stuff up. They just see, great, let's have a good time and let's just play. So when I think of, all the times that have been tough, the obstacles, I think they're not really obstacles. They're just lessons to go, come on, Sid, you can do better than this. And there's that great thing, isn't it? I mean, as you know, the app that we launched last year is that whole 1 minute principle, is that we've all got a minute every day that we can think of, how do I improve? How do I make a better life for myself and for others? And that's what I kind of love about that thinking, is just, come on, we're better than this. When you look at the landscape of the world and sadly all the conflicts that are going on, and some of the shootings all the shootings that take place in America and around the world, and it's just so sad. And when we explore people's values, as then we realise that we're more similar than we are different. And that if we had those conversations around values, and not around value, not around material things or land or ownership, but if we truly got to the essence of who we are, of love and family and honesty and trust and all the things that keep us safe and allow us to feel safe and be creative as wonderful human beings, then it would be a very different world. And I think for me, that's why I love those obstacles and challenges now, and I don't get annoyed and go, why me? I just go, great, thanks. It's taught me something else. I'm not saying my life is a bed of roses, because it certainly isn't, but I'm just so grateful for those opportunities to learn, to grow, to find more magic, to live more magic, and then to share and give more magic. So what keeps me going when times get tough? You do. My children do. They really do. I cannot tell you how they all act as 3 mirrors or 4 mirrors to the person that I am. And, they really make me think. And it's funny because I'm looking at my desk at the moment, and I picked up a book which I read years ago, and I've read it a couple of times since. Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by the great Susan Jeffers. It's a brilliant, brilliant book. It's only a short read, but it was a really powerful book that I read years ago. And I think now, I like that fear. I like that essence of, come on then, how are you going to make this work? How can we get this to more people? And in 2024, we did a live session in America, which was amazing. We're hoping to do work in Ireland. As I mentioned, we launched the app, which has been fantastic. I mean, it's been wonderful. It works so well. we're redoing 2 of the books this year, and we'll reprint those. We'll get those into audio. We're going to be doing more work with the visually impaired around the world. There are just so many opportunities, really, to allow us to, to dig deep, to go again, and to do as Steve Jobs said, think differently. He talked in a great speech that he gave in, I think it was 2005, it's 20 years ago at Stanford University, is that you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them kind of looking back. And I think it's that thing, isn't it, to stay hungry, to keep being that maverick, to want to change the world in some way. And that's what keeps me going, it really does. So what advice would I give to my younger self? Know thyself, don't give up. Keep going. Be the creative, crazy maverick that wants to do things differently, that uses creativity and imagination to help people transform and change their lives. I think that's... And also, I think, for me, not to be scared of anything. And I used to be terribly scared of the dark, and I talk about that with my kids. I used to be scared and fearful of so much, not fitting in, not being normal, that whole crazy word, normal. But I think for me, it's to not worry about any of that stuff, and also to not worry. What advice would I give to others? The same, really. Be you. Find out who you are. Find out what your values are. Find out what makes you come alive. Creativity, imagination. There's so many people that we work with who are in jobs that they don't enjoy, but they're incredibly creative. They love cooking, they love sewing, they love knitting, they love walking, being outside, building stuff. And I think that's the essence of being human, isn't it? I mean, there's some great research that says that the people who are the happiest people, the people who work with their hands. So true. When I write and create, I'm at my happiest. I love doing it. And I think that's the advice, is to find your thing. Not obviously give up everything and whatever, but if you do want to and travel around the world and do stuff, then yeah, do it. I mean, one of my heroes, again, Steve Jobs, is Walt Disney. I loved what he created, and I love what has been created. I love all the Disney movies. I love Pixar. I love all of that stuff. It's just wonderful. And that's what makes us so different human beings. It really is. So what legacy would I like to leave behind? I hope that this company, me, goes on for generations, decades after I've gone. And I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm not being morbid. I'm not saying that, I'm facing the end, although, we all are, aren't we, in some way. It's inevitable at one point we'll die and whatever. But I think for me that gives me more focus. I'm 61 now, which is great. It's a lovely age, and I'm more hungry now to kind of do stuff. And for me, leaving that legacy of... And it was something actually that I met a brilliant guy called Chris White, who's the CEO of Vision Ireland. And he's on the podcast next month. But one thing that he talks about was a little bit of a kind of insight into his talk. Was I said to him, so what legacy do you want? And he said, well, there's a famous rugby club, isn't there, that says that when you take off your jersey that you wear, is to leave it in a better condition or a better place than when you put it on. And I think for me, that's such a great saying, isn't it? Am I going to leave the world a better place than when I came into it? I hope the answer is yes, I really do. So that's my legacy that I'd like to leave behind. How do I see the magic in myself and others in the world? I think for me, it's that creativity, it's that thinking, based on whatever it is, genetics, environment, or whatever. I think that's a really important thing for me, of how that's changed my life and how that changes the life of many, many other people too. And I think that's the really important bit that I see. And I see it in so many people. I see it in my children, in the way that they interact with the world and the way they see stuff, which is just beautiful and brilliant. It's amazing. And I see it in so many others too. When I think about the creativity that's around in the world and what people are doing, I think it's amazing. What's my fizzy pop moment? I think for me, my fizzy pop moment is that when we're running courses, whether online or in person, it's that wonderful kind of penny drop moment where somebody realizes that they're thinking. We do this exercise called the bag of crap, which is just so powerful. And it's all based on what bag of crap you're carrying around in terms of your thinking, and, get people to write it down and draw a bag or whatever. But then when they start looking at those thoughts, they kind of realize that they're just thoughts, that you don't have to carry that stuff around with you, and that you can leave it behind. You can let it go, as Elsa so beautifully sang in Frozen. And I think that's what's so important with this, is that, when people do find and discover, they just go, wow, I never realised. And it's the same with prisons, when I think of, there was one young lad, so it was a 2-day course, and on day one, at the end of the day, he said, "Oh, Sid, can I take my books home?" And we usually give them to them at the end of the session 2. And I said, "Yeah, of course you can." And anyway, he took them back to his cell, and the next day turned up, and I said to the group, 10 prisoners and staff, I said, "So has anything changed?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Last night," he said, "I needed to phone my mum." He said, "Because I'm out shortly." And he said, and I asked her if I could come and live at home when I'm released. And she said, "No, life is just mayhem when you're here." So he said he grabbed his razor, and he said that he was going to harm himself, he'd had a history of doing that throughout his whole life, and he was in his mid-20s. And he said, "And then I realised I had your books." He said, "So I picked up the first book, which is a dark coloured one." He said, "I started reading it." And he said, "And I picked up the Me pencil, which is something we also give on day one." He said, "I used my razor to sharpen that pencil." And then he held up a A4 piece of paper, and he said, "And this is what I want to do with the rest of my life." It was 2-sided. He said, "I want to set up a digital business. I want to do this." And he said, "You've inspired me to do something different." And he said, "That's the first time in my life," he said, "I haven't self-harmed myself when I've had bad news." And that's huge. Was that a fizzy pop moment? Yeah. And everybody in the session, every single person applauded him and clapped and said, "Well done." And there are many moments like that. There are many fizzy pop moments that I experience in my life. My children, when they learn to read a new word, or they do something different or something, there's always those fizzy pop moments, in every day. And I think, for me, doing a gratitude list at the end of every day, reflecting back on the day, I don't think too far behind, and I don't look into the future. I really don't. I just do what's next. But when I think of that little gratitude, the thing that I do and the things that I'm grateful for in the day, there's always something to be grateful for. There's always a fizzy pop moment, even if something's been really tough. And even when I went to Mag's funeral, when I touched her coffin at the end and said goodbye, I just smiled and said thank you, because she was such a rich character. She really was. Extravagant and crazy bonkers in every beautiful way. So there's always that kind of fizzy pop moment. What one word would I use to describe myself? I think for me it's inspiring, because I'm inspired by you. I'm inspired by life. I'm inspired by my children. I said goodbye to my dog Bilbo quite a few years ago, and I wrote a little post about Be More Bilbo, because that was his name. I'm inspired by him, and I'm still inspired by him. And the kids know we've got his ashes by our bed, or by my bed, and there's a little plaque on there, and most days I say hello, good morning, and I miss him. I miss his smell. I miss his craziness. But again, he inspires me to be better, because he was just so kind. I think he only ever growled at somebody once. Well, he never growled at a human being, but he growled at another dog, I think, once in his entire life. So for me, it's about inspiring, that one word, because every day inspires me to do something different, to be different, to exercise my creativity and imagination, and to help people in some way. So that's my podcast of 2024 and 2025. I wish you all the best for this year, and that when things get tough, and they will get tough, is to keep going, is to find that essence of you, to find your magic, and to keep living that magic, and to keep giving and sharing that magic. And that, let this be a magical day. There are 1,440, minutes in every day. We get at least half of those awake. So make the most of them and really make them count. And thank you for being you. And here's to a wonderful, happy new year. And thank you. Bye-bye.